How should I go about my transition? Do I want to socially transition? Do I want to medically transition? Do I want to do both? And if so, in what order do I do all of this? So today's video was inspired by a comment from Lydia Bentley. Would be cool to hear your thoughts on the relationship between social and medical transitioning, like how some people do them at the same time, or how some folks transition socially way before HRT, or the other way around. Thank you, Lydia, for your comment. So before diving into the steps and how we might order all of this, what do social and medical transition even include most of the time? Essentially, social transition is just any change that you take to affirm your gender that does not involve any medical interventions. So this could include things like changing the clothes you wear, wearing more makeup, wearing less makeup, may involve adding accessories like jewelry, or may include changing the name you go by, which you may legally change it, or maybe you just tell people in your life, this is the name I'm going by. Maybe you'll also start going by pronouns that are different from the ones that were kind of forced upon you based on your sex and gender assigned at birth. Medical transition, on the other hand, not surprisingly, would involve any medical step designed to physically change your body in any way. The most common medical transition thing is hormone therapy. Medical transition can also include top surgery, bottom surgery, facial feminization surgery, hair removal through laser electrolysis, and really any procedure that's designed to quote unquote masculinize or feminize your body. So how does all of this come together? I want to first say, as always, there is no right or wrong way to transition. As long as you aren't harming yourself and you're not harming others, it's about finding the unique transition path that works for you. You may gravitate towards all of the steps that I mentioned, or the steps you're prioritizing may be completely outside of what I mentioned. Some people out there may only want to socially transition and have no desire to medically transition. Regardless, you are valid as a trans or non-binary person. It does not make you any less of a woman if you're a trans woman who decides that medical transition is not for you or is not what you need. It does not make you any less of a man if you're a trans man who decides not to pursue medical transition. And it doesn't make you any less valid as a non-binary person if you don't pursue medical transition. Furthermore, trans women don't have to be feminine, trans men don't have to be masculine, and non-binary people, you don't have to be androgynous. As others have said before me, we don't owe anyone any specific gender presentation. We are valid for being who we are and showing up as we are. Full stop. But if you find yourself in a spot where you want to pursue both social and medical transition steps, you may be trying to figure out how to plan all of that out. For me, I started transitioning socially about 2 to 3 months before I started hair removal, maybe about 6 to 7 months before I started HRT. I was still part-time in terms of not being fully out everywhere and figuring all these pieces out as I went along. It made sense to me to start coming out to a few close and trusted friends, start presenting as Chloe at home in a few outings around town, and start going to a support group before I really dived into many of those medical transition steps. I wanted to start figuring out who I was, who I am, before making any of these more permanent changes. All that being said, I did start HRT about 7 months before coming out full-time, because I wanted to, at least give myself the chance of having a few physical changes if possible before fully coming out. I feel social transition is always going to come first, or most often going to come first, due to these barriers we often encounter for those of us who do desire those medical transition steps. Sure, there are some of us who may start on hormones or may start hair removal before coming out to anyone or presenting ourselves to anyone but ourselves. But I don't think any of us would likely want to come out full-time before trying out any social transition steps. The first time I went out as Chloe was well before my first day being out full-time. Having those coincide, that sounds not only fucking stressful, but I feel like I'd be setting myself up for failure. Way too much stress and pressure to try to get it all right on the first try. But long story short, think about your current situation. How safe is it to start coming out to people? How safe is it to start presenting as yourself before any medical changes? Passing is not important to everyone, but depending on where you live, not passing can be dangerous. If you don't live in a safe area or situation, or if there's a risk of being kicked out of the house, due to an unsupportive living situation, trying out social transition things like new clothes and makeup may only occur in private at first, and setting up those medical transition steps before coming out may make more sense. So you might be doing a lot of those medical transition steps before most of those social transition steps. Before coming out to anyone, you may be starting therapy to get a letter for hormones, or finding a affirming primary care doctor or endocrinologist who works on informed consent model if you're trying to forego the letter process. And, for those of you that hair removal is a priority, it's usually a good thing to start this very early in the journey as well, because it can take several years. It can take multiple years, depending on how much hair you have and how dark it is, and how much you want to get rid of. Just know that these changes will get harder and harder to hide as time goes on, and then you might have to start considering more social transition options if you're doing all of these things while still fully or mostly fully closeted. For those of you that are in more supportive situations, more supportive cities, states, more supportive living situations, socially transitioning first or medically and socially transitioning at the same time might be more feasible. There's unfortunately always a risk of being treated poorly as a trans person or a non-binary person, but some environments certainly have a lower risk depending on how progressive the environment is and whether or not you also have a good in-person support system to kind of join you on the journey. But I would say the most important parts at the beginning of your transition are beginning to accept yourself and just starting your transition, whatever that looks like. Overcoming the apprehension of taking that first step, I think, is one of the hardest parts of the journey. Finally starting the journey. But it does get easier over time. The how, in terms of how the rest of your transition will unfold, that will unfold over time and fall into place over time after you take those first few steps. Remind yourself that you don't have to have it all figured out at once, and it's perfectly okay if you don't. Just remember to weigh the pros and cons based on the environment you live in and the risks you're willing to take. There are always risks involved with sharing ourselves fully with the world around us, but it is very much worth it. I'll go ahead and stop here for today. What are your reactions? What steps have you taken in social or medical transition? And how did you figure out what you needed for your journey? How did you navigate determining the order of social and medical steps if you're kind of pursuing both social and medical transition? Let me know all of this and more down in the comments below. And as always, Tipsy and I love you all and hope you're staying safe and sound. If you have not done so already, please be sure to give this a huge thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and notification bell. I love you all. Bye for now.